Hello, welcome back to the Live Reality Game Podcast. My name's Steven, and I'm thrilled today to be part of a podcast where we discuss disability inclusion in live reality games. And this is not my idea. This all goes to Nina and her idea. She's the one that pitched this. So I'm very excited to welcome Nina and Mira to come here to talk about disability inclusion. And so without further ado, we'll start with Nina. Nina, can you introduce yourself and talk about the games you played?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Nina. I have been in the LRG world for about 1.5 years now. I started, my first game was Surviving Bloomington last summer, where I met Steven in 2023. And then I had to take some time off from games for my disabilities. But I came back this year. I played in the Mall, Ohio, where I met Mira. I also played in Survivor Weekender Season 3, which is coming out soon. Episodes are, which is very exciting. And then I also did a one-day Survivor game earlier this fall, a few months ago, Survivor Byron. So I haven't played that many games, but I love the community. It's a lot of fun.
Mira?
Hi, I'm Mira. I was just here a few weeks ago talking about the Mall, Ohio 2024. Similar to Nina, I have been in the LRG community for about 1.5 years. I just kind of decided to speed run doing as many games as I could in that short amount of time, which in, retrospect wasn't great for my, body and my health. However, we've learned and we've overcome. I started out on the Mall, Ohio 2023. Following that, I competed in Columbus Survivor Season 2, Golden Gates Season 1, Columbus Traders Season 1, The Challenge Great Lakes Season 1, Surviving Bloomington Season 7, which starts airing episodes in February, the Mall, Ohio 2024, and the Francis franchise, which is a 1-day game that's now expanding to a 2-day game here in Columbus.
Fun. So you've really gotten all sorts of you've got Survivor, Traders, the Mole, original format, the Challenge. You've really got all sorts of different formats going on.
Any format you could think of, I've attempted it at this point. I still haven't won any games that we know of, so I can't say if I won Bloomington or not yet.
Yeah.
So who knows?
So, between the three of us, we have a breadth of experience across games and different kinds of games: Survivor, Traders, the Mole, etc. And I think the conversation about disability inclusion is really interesting because I don't think I'd ever really thought about that in games until I played Surviving Bloomington, where one thing that impressed me was Casey's intentionality when he designed the game to have this inclusion aspect. Because when you think of Survivor, you think of starving, sleeping on the ground, not having anything. And Casey was like, hey, I don't want the survival aspect to be off-putting. I want to make sure this game is accessible, as open to players as possible. So that was the first time for me that ever been something I thought about. But for the two of you, that disability inclusion has been important for other reasons. Nina, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I'll start off. Disability inclusion is important in life for those of us who are fortunate enough to be disabled and work through life as disabled people. I suffer from chronic migraines, chronic pain. I have old injuries that just quite never healed kind of correctly. So I have an old shoulder injury that spikes up from time to time, kind of just whenever it gets aggravated. I have now had 4 surgeries on the same hip in the last 8 years. I have a lot of chronic pain with that, and I walk with a cane sometimes, when I need to, such as when I played games, because you're on your feet a lot and you're doing this wild and crazy stuff. But going into games and making them a friendlier, more inclusive space for everybody and not just disabled people benefits everybody, right? There's a lot of talk about how accessibility for disabled people benefits not just disabled people. So those are things such as like automatic doors, right? Automatic doors doesn't just benefit disabled people. That can benefit elderly people who are maybe able-bodied but can't open a heavy door. Benefits people with strollers, et cetera, right? But when we're talking about live reality games, the like what's really important here in a really 3, 4, 5 condensed version of the game, right? Like we're not going to be starving the same way that they are on 26 or 39 days, right? We're not going to be going through those sorts of body challenges the way that they're going to be. So like, why make it that hard on us in a condensed version? So like, you can make it more comfortable, right? The game is interesting because of the strategy. The game is interesting because we're people playing the game. The game is not interesting because we're starving and sleep deprived and in pain, right? So the more you can let people have some of those comforts. Yes, like obviously like being stranded on a deserted island with like limited resources is part of Survivor. But like you can let people bring like the sleeping bag and the like camping, like the mat underneath to have it be a little more comfortable to sleep on. You can let people bring some snacks in because like you're still like going balls to the wall and you're still not eating a lot of food. Like, we don't need to go so extreme. And that can benefit us and keep us comfortable and keep more people safe too, right? And keep everybody safer.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The first Survivor game I did was Survivor Columbus. And one of the first things I did when I was cast was I reached out to the host and producer, John Wells, because I was on medication at the time to help manage some of my disabilities that required me to keep my sugar levels at a certain like base, or I would drop. I would get sick. I would pass out. It was very dangerous. And because this is a game where you're really not supposed to bring in snacks or food, you're not supposed to. And he immediately said, no, absolutely bring what you need. We don't want that happening. We absolutely want everyone to have access to anything they need for medical necessity. No game that I've been on has denied me my inhalers. I suffer from asthma, as well as being a larger individual. A lot of these really physical taxing games can really take a toll on my body. I also suffer from chronic pain. And I was recently diagnosed with POTS, which they're also exploring if I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome because of that. And we actually discovered it because of an incident that occurred on a game this past June in Michigan. And so having access to these like resources, the production team's on standby saying, nope, here are salt packets. Here's your inhaler. Here is water. Here is an electrolyte drink. Like that has been so incredible because it doesn't come off as a barrier. I'm like, oh, I can't play these games because I'm not like physically fit. I've never thought that. After my first physical game, I've never thought, oh, I can't do these games, because people have gone out of their way to make sure that it is accommodating for us, that it is, are the challenges hard? So yeah, but they're still absolutely doable, even with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about Survivor games, I feel like I see the live reality games like on a spectrum of difficulty. You know, like take Survival Challenge. I think that's one of the most brutal games out there in terms of you really don't have anything to sleep with, maybe a blanket. Hopefully it's not wet. There's little food. I know, like, because like even just think of nicotine or caffeine. I know people who've had withdrawals from those in those games, and they don't let you have them at all. While some other games like Real Foot, I would say, is also a challenging game. It's long, it's 8 days, not a lot of food, you don't have much comfort, but I know they allow players to have nicotine if they need it, right? So they don't prohibit that, so it makes it a little bit easier. Versus Survival Challenge, I know that's definitely knocked some people out who have like, hey, I'm really struggling as a result of this, and I didn't predict going cold turkey day 3 would be the worst.
Yeah. Yeah, that would, I mean, it's, again, it comes down to like, the games are interesting because it's like people are strategizing and people are like trying to, work with other people or not work with other people or keeping their enemies closer than their friends. Like, that's what makes it interesting. And of course, there are other elements that can make it harder to go through. And make it more difficult and make it like a challenge on top of it. But if somebody wants to play your game and they have medical needs, you should be accommodating those, whether that medical need is a cane or they need extra food on hand because of blood sugar, or they need to have if they're a diabetic and they have their glucose set up to their cell phone, so they need their cell phone nearby to alert them. Like, you should just accommodate that. You should, and that, because they're already coming into this game that's really hard. And so allowing them to have whatever they need to have, it's not going to give them an advantage over an able-bodied person who doesn't have
If
a
anything,
disability.
it almost levels the playing field.
Yes.
Because I won't say that it does level the playing field. It's not going to be level.
Yeah.
We're always going to come in at some sort of a disadvantage, whether that be an actual physical disadvantage, or for people like me who have autism and ADHD, that is also a struggle that I have to face, is having to work through new social environments and trying to figure out how to like work and thrive in them. But also even just the stigma of coming in and being like, if you do have a cane, if you do have a visible disability, people kind of just off the bat are like, oh, they're going to count you out, or they're going to picture you as the weak one. They're going to put you as an easy first boot because they don't think you can do it. And so that's something we already have coming in that we have to fight against. Giving us access to our tools that we need to like make it through a regular day doesn't give us any sort of advantage.
Exactly.
I want to ask you about the accommodations you've seen across the games you played. I know, like, I kind of mentioned Survivor Bloomington was a game that's a bit eye-opening in terms of, how it's modified the survival elements to make it more accessible. I know when I played, I was on medication at the time where I'd eat every 4 hours. And so Casey being like, yeah, no sweat, pack we need here, we'll store your extra here, you're going to get like that. That was really great for me, because I'm like, man, I don't want to drop out because I just got on medication during the 1 week I'm playing this game. And so what accommodations have you seen or experienced across the games you played?
Casey is a really amazing example of providing those kinds of accommodations. I obviously can't go into too much detail because he will have my head if I spoil the season, but I will say some things did occur to me during the season, and Casey was immediately willing to drop everything to make sure I was okay. They went to productions like tent area. They brought me fruit. They made sure I was drinking electrolytes, salt packets, water. They were willing to pretty much do anything and everything to make sure that I was safe. And they were not going to push me to do anything that my limits couldn't handle. And that was something that was really amazing, because I, going to a Survivor game, I'm like, I mean, if you pass out, that's just like Survivor, right? And they were like, absolutely not. Like, we are not going to do that. I will say, because this doesn't spoil anything, there was a point in time where I could not walk back and forth to camp, and they just had me stay up at the production area where we competed in challenges, because it was the safer alternative and made it easier for me to still continue on with that.
I have brought my cane into games. And I remember I texted Casey, because it was the first game that I played. It was also early on into needing a cane. And so I was also very like, I don't know how much I'm going to need this or not. I don't even know. And I was like, is it okay if I bring my cane? He was like, yes, of course, whatever you need. And now it feels like silly to like think that I needed to ask that question.
I've asked multiple times if I can bring my inhalers. Just because I'm like, it's an assistive device. So I'm like, I don't know if I allow it. The challenge 2 weeks, I reached out and I was like, hi, can I bring my inhalers, but also can I give production an extra one to keep on them in case, just because I knew that was going to be the most physically demanding game I've ever played. And so I brought extra accommodations for myself because of it. And when I say that production was there any second that they thought that I was going to start needing it, they were like, here you go, like, take your inhaler, please. They were like, because that's when they weren't going to modify the challenges for me.
Yeah.
Which I appreciated.
Right.
As a disabled person, I don't want things modified for me.
Right. Exactly.
But they were willing to be like, oh no, nope, we're gonna make sure you're alive through it.
Yes. Right. So there's like bringing your cane because you need, like, I need my device to help me walk or to help keep me strong through a 3 to 4 day game. Right. If I'm lasting through 3 to 4 days, I need my cane to keep me strong so I can do the challenges without my cane. Because otherwise, and like, because low chance that I can actually use my cane in a challenge on a Survivor game. Like, pretty low chance that can actually happen. But some other things are like, you can have like, your own little, like a little game bag, right? Or you can bring something into the game with you. And for both my multi-day Survivor games, that has been true. And so I'm packing, like, obviously all my like daily medications, but I'm packing my special pain medications. I'm packing my migraine medications. I've packed my like electrolyte powdered drinks to make sure, because that's something that triggers my migraines, is like when I get dehydrated. So I'm making sure that I'm having my electrolytes so I don't get dehydrated, so I can not have a migraine. So those are accommodations that I'm having like for myself that I don't really need to like involve production in, which luckily, mostly I don't need to. But it's stuff like even if you're not disabled, like Stephen, you had mentioned that you are on a medication that you needed to eat. And that's like something that can just come up, like, for anybody. And that doesn't make you disabled, but suddenly you need an accommodation in this game that you're playing. And needing an accommodation, it makes the game inclusive. And so being open to that makes your game inclusive as a producer, and being accommodating to that is inclusive. And so there's so many scenarios and so many things just happen, whether it is disabling or not, or whether it's temporary or not, right? Like, we played in the Mole, Ohio this year with Nate, who broke his foot or his ankle.
He broke his foot in 3 places at the Challenge Great Lakes.
Yeah, and so he came into the Mole, Ohio with that injury and being on a scooter. Boots, like, scooted all around. And so Tim accommodated that. Like, there were some challenges that was like, okay, so Nate's on this team, so he's got a special task. And it seemed like really easy that Tim figured out how to accommodate the fact that, like, Nate can't really leave the first floor of this house, because like it's just not.
Girl was hopping up and down those stairs.
Yeah. So it's not that hard, right? Because we're not asking for challenges to be made to accommodate us, right? We can accommodate them for ourselves. Or if it's just something that we're like, my body can't do this, we'll tap out, right? Like, we're not asking for that. What we're needing is stuff that can help us make sure that we stay safe, which should be the goal for all producers of live reality games. You want all of your people to stay safe. So,
and I will
we just might need a little extra help.
I will say regarding modifying challenges, John for Columbus Survivor was really amazing. There's a challenge that I absolutely detest that they do every single season, which is where they have to leapfrog over people.
Oh.
I can't physically do that because I can't jump that high. I will also injure someone. So I walked up to the first person and I was like, am I allowed to just do this? And I just whipped my leg over the top of them. So I was just like one leg like kicking. So I was still doing wild movements and it was still taking just as long as anyone jumping. But John's like, yeah, no, you can totally do that because that was my body's availability to leapfrog.
Yeah.
Which is like, I can only do what I can do. So
right.
Like there were so many other instances of like, I have to slightly modify what I'm doing in the challenge. And so like to some people, they could read it as like, oh, like why is Mira getting to like do this movement slightly different than other people? And I'm like, well, I'm not getting to, I physically have to.
Right.
My body can only do so much.
Right. And that's, I mean, honestly, that can be anybody's body. And it can be a fully abled person's body who maybe just somebody who's like, I don't know what leapfrogging is. Let me just see what happens. And I don't know if I want to leapfrog over anybody. Like, if I'm in pain or not, like, that just doesn't sound like my kind of challenge that I want to participate in too much.
Well, and I'll say this for Nate and myself, we both were medically pulled from the Challenge Great Lakes. Nate shattered his foot in 3 places, jumping into the shallow end of a pond in a challenge. And the footage there's no footage, and any footage surrounding it has been deleted of my medical incident. I collapsed mid-elimination in a sand pit from POTS. And I actually ended up getting really severely concussed. But they made the decisions to pull us, which no one likes having limitations put on. But they made the decision to pull us for our safety. And rather than just having us sit there and do nothing all weekend, they accommodated us by fitting us into the production side of things, where we rode around on our little golf cart all weekend. And Nate, the ER nurse, was our medical ambulance, and myself, with my degree in psychology and my history and behavioral health, I was the mental health ambulance. And we just drove around. So anytime someone got hurt or needed like a therapy session, Nate and I were there. And so we still got to be so fully involved, even though we had to be.
That's amazing.
It was, oh my God, it was
I love that.
Cool. I was
I love that.
Great. I just get to be like goofy and like ride around on the little golf cart.
I love that so much. As far as what I've in other games experienced, I think let's go back to the question that was actually asked of us. In Survivor Weekender, I just brought my cane. I used my cane the whole time. The camp that I was at originally, our water was like down a mudslide of a hill, which wasn't like that big of a deal at first. But then it got rainy and it was like, no. And I was like, no, can production please move our water up to where our camp is? Because like, this is not great for like any of us, but like, especially me, please. And that was like a reasonable request. And they did that. So that was nice. And again, that's an accommodation that benefits everybody. So that was something in there. Survivor Weekender was also really great in terms of our mental health. They checked in. Not every confession that they filmed with us, but I'm not sure how they decided on productions and how often to check in or who was checking in with people, but they were checking in with us when they would film confessions. They would turn the camera off and they would stop and then say, and then now I want to check in with you in terms of your safety and your mental health. How are you doing? Is there anything that you need? Anything that we can do? And so that was really great to have those check-ins multiple times a day to make sure that not only were we like physically safe in the environment, but like mentally we were doing okay as well. And then we were given space, if we were voted out after the game, gone to Ponderosa to check in, like, what do you need? What can I help you with? Do you need anything? Check in with that from production as well. And then there is the decompression doc that they circulated around that Davey has made, who's in the LRG community, that I had not seen before. So that was my first time seeing the decompression doc, which was really nice, which was a nice reflection after playing a 3, 4, 5+ day game. To have that around, I really like that. And I know I talked with Melanie, who said that she knew, I don't remember what game it was now, but she knew that at one point one game was trying to find a sign language interpreter for.
That's incredible.
They believe a player, but they weren't sure on the details. But they knew that that was something that they were looking around for at one point in time. And that is really incredible to like have an ASL interpreter for presumably a player in your game, which is really amazing.
Yeah, I've definitely, the post-game experience, I think, is something that's easily neglected because you're so focused on creating the game experience. It's sometimes you don't think about what happens afterwards, especially players who go home early, right? Like losing sucks, and you're like, well, now what do I do, right? And so I think a way to include or help those players, but with the processing is really important. And I've seen a variety of tactics, such as Jamie Bourne's Who Is the Mole live game includes the eliminated players in the challenges, and they are still kind of playing in a sense. Or even like the way Surviving Bloomington has redemption. Redemption is a way to keep players kind of involved and invest in the game. There's a variety of tactics. I just think it's important not to ignore the aspect of like the experience doesn't simply end because someone's voted out. The experience is ongoing.
Yeah, that's really nice too when you're producing a game as players are voted out or no longer in the game, whether it's a vote out game or like the mole, you're not good at sussing out who the mole is, so you're out. I mean, you're not voted out.
Tell us your ways.
Don't listen to everybody. Listen to yourself. I don't know. I don't know. My ways was that like I heard Wayne said something and I was like, that seems really sus to me. I think it's Wayne. And then I just went, psh, Wayne. And I was right. But I think involving the people who are like out of the game is really great.
Oh yeah, I very much agree. And I will say regarding the like people leaving early thing, or especially I will say this is especially in vote out games. For our neurodivergent friends out there, I have rejection sensitivity dysphoria as a part of my autism and my ADHD. Vote out games are really hard. I will say I don't think I have cried harder in a game than when I was banished in Columbus Traders, because it was 15 people revealed their votes before me and all but one of them said my name, and it was devastating. And I immediately went into, I need to leave. Everyone hates me. I shouldn't be here. I need to go home. And thankfully, I have so many friends in the LRG community now that like they know those signs to be like, oh no, we're not doing that. But like Trish is an amazing example of this. She left after they got back to the house during a challenge explanation to find me while I was helping production do something, to make sure that I knew that she loved me and cared about me. And that really sunk in more than just like when you're like, oh, it was like a good game, sorry. Like truly checking in on those players after you eliminate them is so important, because their mind is just going 1,000 miles a minute being like, what did I do to make everyone not like me? Especially in blindside votes where it's like 5-0. Becca on the Golden Gates is a great example of that. She was completely blindsided and got 0 votes to stay, and she was devastated, rightfully so. And like you really do need to have someone kind of there after to really kind of reinforce that they're not being dismissed and they're not like someone that to be around.
Yeah, I think the having like a mental health advocate, or having mental health, even if it's not a person, but having mental health resources for the people who are voted out in a vote out game, not only benefits everybody, but especially those who are autistic or have depression and anxiety, have ADHD, who might take it harder than people who are not neurodivergent.
Like everyone can say it's not personal, and we know it's not personal. Our brain doesn't, though. Our brain is immediately in fight or flight mode of like, oh my God, this entire cast and production absolutely hate me. I should not be here. I should just like leave and like don't bother them with my presence anymore. And no one thinks that. No one has thought that a single time about anything. It's just your brain just goes crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think, largely in this community, things are not personal. What happens in the game happens in the game. I know. That's why I said largely, Stephen. Largely.
I didn't say anything.
You're just interpreting whatever you see me doing. I don't know what you're talking
about. I don't know if I agree with that. Largely, I think, like, we're all, like, real people. We all understand. Some people might take things a little too seriously, might take things a little too emotional in a negative way, in maybe a little not acceptable way. But largely we are all here for each other and are all here to support one another. And, sometimes you really you don't want to be on the wrong side of the vote. And so that's why somebody gets voted out first, right, Stephen? When you voted me out first?
Sometimes you look at the person and say, they're just a threat at the end. You have to take them out immediately.
Yeah. Right.
Totally what happened. I kind of following this conversation, it's important to have, sometimes like I've seen games produce animosity, and it's important to have it be resolved before people leave the game so it doesn't linger. I want to get to kind of a point we've talked about in terms of accommodations. It feels like there's two kinds of accommodations I can think of. One is accommodations in terms of flexibility in terms of the production team. The other in terms of accommodations and changes to the game itself to accommodate players, because both of you have been very clear, we do not want changes to the challenges. Like, leave the challenges as is. We want to compete in the challenges. Can you talk more about, I guess, defining what accommodations are, what you mean by accommodations?
That's such like a difficult thing to kind of navigate when you don't have a disability, because for me, and I mean, Nina and I have very different disabilities. So what my version of an accommodation is going to be really different than hers. But my mother, who is also chronically ill, she has CRPS in 3 of her limbs. It severely limits her ability to walk and do lots of things. She gets so mad when you tell her she can't do something.
Mhm.
And it's very much the same way that if you tell everyone this is the challenge we're doing, but Mira, you can't do that, so I'm going to have you do this. I'm immediately like, oh no, I am doing that times 10 now because you told me I can't.
Mhm.
And so it also kind of puts out this idea that like as someone with a disability, you're not as capable as others, which
Mhm.
isn't true at all. I am half deaf. I wear a hearing aid in my right ear. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to compete in any challenges that involve listening or like recall from like verbal cues because I don't have the same hearing as other people. What it does mean though is that production should allow me to wear my hearing aid. And if that means I have to get my phone out of their bag in order to adjust the settings to be able to hear, that should be something that production's willing to be flexible with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there are things like, for me, if there was, let's say, a number of like fallen trees or limbs, like on a path that like from camp to the challenge area that I was like having to repeatedly walk over day to day, or like just junk in the way, like that's an area that like that doesn't really matter. It can benefit everybody. Nobody's getting an advantage over this. It's not changing the game, but it makes it easier for me. It makes it a lot easier for me on my body. So I would ask, is there a different like path we can take that maybe I don't have to be repeatedly stepping over stuff or like navigating around like in this winding path? Can we maybe clear this? And that's just the environment that you're in, right? But that's also something that you think about with safety, right? Anybody else who's fully able-bodied can trip over that. Probably easier than me because I'm hyper-focused on not tripping over it all, right? But there are things that like, in a challenge, in a team challenge, I just have to place myself where it's going to be best, right? In the best position for myself. Or if I'm going to kind of suck at this thing because my body is just not going to be great at it, that's just going to be what happens. But, I agree with Mira, like, allow you a few minutes if you need to change the batteries in your hearing aids. Allow you to like make sure the levels are right. Or if somebody has a visual impairment and there's something sight wise, make sure that they are actually in a spot where they can see, not give them an advantage see, but have them actually see it, whereas not have them be in a spot where they actually can't see. Because if they actually can't see it, then they're actually at a disadvantage, right?
We had that with
like
voting
that.
days.
Yeah.
We had a player who was colorblind, and they had to do one of those puzzles where you have to get like colors on like certain sides of things.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually marked like one of the sides because I think they were red-green colorblind. So they marked like an R on the red. That doesn't change anything. He's getting the same visual cues as everyone else, but if it wasn't there, he would have no idea that the colors were
Mm-hmm.
lined.
Yeah, and that reminds me too that we actually had a color-based test in the one-day game that I played, and somebody was colorblind too. Luckily, they were like saying the colors out as they're saying them, but then it was like memory as well, and so you also had to like pick up the tile that matched. So like the person had to also look down and like, so it's also something that like if you're doing something color based, you should be doing your research on the types of color blindness, and then when you're creating your puzzle or your tiles for whatever, make sure it won't be a problem for people who are colorblind, because people who are colorblind generally are not going to say anything until they're in that moment and go, oh shit, I'm colorblind, right? Like they're not, in my experience, people who are colorblind are not saying I need an accommodation ahead of time.
Yeah.
Until they suddenly get there and go, shit, I'm colorblind and I can't. But now they're at a severe disadvantage because they're colorblind, because you didn't do your research to make sure that your challenge is inclusive of colorblind
I love
people.
that you keep saying do your research, because one of the things that I'm going to highlight again about Challenge Great Lakes was they did their research. They not only had a safety coordinator on site for every single challenge, all of these challenges were safety tested in advance. But beyond that, they went out of their way to make sure that they had harnesses or life jackets that fit different body types. So my body type was not meant for the type of life jacket that they had for everyone else. So they had to get an alternative one. That one also didn't end up working. I still wore it in the first challenge because that's not an accommodation we can make. We're not risking safety. So I still had to wear the life jacket that was not great, but they immediately went out and found an alternative life jacket that could be worn, because they were like, well, we knew coming in that like we would need certain accommodations for people who are larger, who are smaller. And that was something that they really put so much effort into researching. And I think that I love that you mentioned like research the different kinds of color blindness. I think that's such an important thing to do, because if you can go in prepared for this, then nothing's going to come as a surprise and your game becomes even more accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Truly. Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like a major theme is intentionality with game design, right? Intentionality and kind of thinking they're like, all right, we want to do this. How can we do this to make sure that all players in any state can go and be able to do it? Or do we have backups? Like, how do we need to swap this if certain conditions are met? And this isn't quite what we're talking about, but like food challenges and players who are vegan or vegetarian, I feel it's kind of similar to that nature where, you know, we love gross food challenges, but there are certain players like, hey, if I have a dietary restriction, I can't partake in the food challenge. That's disappointing for all parties involved, right? And so having, if not designing the full food challenge, but having options of food challenge for players who are vegetarian or vegan, I think is really helpful and important to make sure that we're all participating and playing together in this.
Yes, absolutely. So far, I feel like every game that I've applied to has asked if I have dietary restrictions.
And allergies,
allergies. If you're asking for food allergies and dietary restrictions up front, and then you're putting a food challenge in your game, and you are not accommodating every single person who put allergies and restrictions, you should not be doing that challenge. Absolutely. Like, absolutely not. You know, there are people, there's somebody who I've played games with who is a vegan who has said that they have had to be like, okay, well, I can't participate in this food challenge because it's not vegan. And you didn't accommodate a vegan who, like, I gave you my dietary, like, I told you I was a vegan in my application. And, like, if you're not, like, that is, like, that's not even a disability inclusion thing. That is just being inclusive, period, to accommodate somebody's dietary restrictions, whether by choice or not. And there is absolutely gross vegan food.
Speaking as someone who had to eat a vegan pastry in an elimination challenge over the summer, yeah. And I will say it was quite literally just a white bread sandwich with ketchup, mustard, and relish. A bunch of it on there.
Ugh.
And I had to eat that after I choked down a habanero pepper and got sick from it.
I mean, like, that's the thing, is that, like, you can do a gross, it's not even gross, right? Food eating, it's just a food eating challenge. You could just have people eat hot peppers. That's not hard.
I disagree about it being hard.
But I mean, like, I'm speaking as a person who walked away from a giant pickle because I hate pickles like nothing else. So, like, I was just like, no, I don't need to win this challenge. I'm fine.
Like, I'll eat bugs before I'll
Also,
eat
I was against a person who loved pickles, so I was like, I'm not.
I'm still waiting for the Marshawn eating the pickle footage to be released to the world.
I know. It's in the lost footage of Surviving Bloomington season 6, sadly. But he looked good eating that pickle on that table.
So we've talked a lot about what producers and games can do as examples of being more accommodating and more inclusion. I want to kind of talk about the stigma of being a visibly or not visibly disabled in a game. I'm going to kind of start with Surviving Bloomington. I know my experience. We start in the same tribe. I may have voted you out, and then I get
You
voted
absolutely
out
did vote me out.
and like didn't help me because I later get voted out, and so I joined you in Redemption, and I don't know when it happened, but at some point you take out the cane. Like you have this really small, very neat collapsible cane. I was like, and then you explain like, this is my cane, and I need it, and like I have massive pain, like issues with my hip because I'm about to have surgery soon. Can you talk about the decision because you had to make a conscious decision, like I'm not going to show the cane. I'm going to see how far I can do with it, and like. Is that decision you would continue making games, or like you're making different decisions around that now? Because I know, like you said, there's this visible stigma that then I have to overcome in a game where Survivor is a brutal game where we vote out who's so and so weakest players at times.
Yeah, that was. I mean, Surviving Bloomington being my first game, there was a lot that I didn't know, and I didn't quite know what to expect of the game. I didn't know what to expect of my body. And it was also early into needing a mobility device. So there was a lot of it. It was not early into the chronic pain, but it was early into a lot of those things. And I came into the game, well, the whole week leading up to the game, I was in a lot of pain. I used my cane the whole time. I think the day before the game started, I was like magically fine. I was like, cool, great, awesome. I'm still bringing my cane because who knows? But I went into the game like nervous and scared. And then I think even more nervous and scared because it was my first game, because I'm dealing with this chronic pain, because I don't know if it's going to flare up, because I'm worried about the perception of using a mobility device, like walking into the game with a cane, like, ooh. I'm coming into a game wanting to prove myself and be a strong person. And, I think I did that maybe a little too good because I got myself right over to Redemption. But which Redemption Island sucked for me. It was awful. It was the worst place for me to be. I couldn't see where I was stepping unless I stayed on that trail, which made it really difficult to go to the bathroom because I wasn't going to pee where everybody could see me once more people got there. So I had to like very carefully navigate down hills on like inches of leaves that hadn't decomposed yet. Like, I don't know where I'm stepping. It was an awful time for anybody who needs a mobility device. But I mean, coming into the game, I made the conscious decision that I was like, I'm going to hide everything and like not be perceived as somebody who needs any kind of help or has any pain at all, unless I need to show it. So I had my cane out when I was alone at Redemption Island. And then when I brought it out with everybody there, it was because I was in so much pain. I couldn't do it anymore. After sleeping on the ground for 2 nights, my hip was just screaming at me, absolutely screaming. And there was no way I could do it anymore. I just couldn't. And so then it was like, I just have to pull out my cane and tell everybody. But like on top of all of the game stuff, I've also been dealing with all of this pain. And like, we're not even done with the game yet because we were still waiting for the like redemption challenge to happen. But like, it was just having seen the seasons of Survivor where, you know, people are an amputee. You know, all I ever think about is Kelly and Nayanka and how Nayanka just tackled her to the ground, or people talk about like, oh, if they get to the end, they're gonna win, and it's because they're disabled, just because they're an amputee. Like that's it. Like you're just talking, like they're just gonna win because they're a disabled person. Like that's it. And I didn't want that to be the stigma. For me, I didn't want to be perceived as weak and voted out first. I didn't want to be perceived as like, oh, well, let's carry her around because she's weak in challenges so that we can beat her later on. And then, oh shit, she's going to get to the end and she's going to win just because she has a cane. And so there was so much going on in my head, obviously. And then, but since then, I know what's best for my body is to just walk in with the cane, because if I'm lasting, especially to day 3, day 4, day 5, I need the cane to keep me strong so that I can drop the cane and do the challenges.
I will say so I have kind of both an invisible and a very visible disability when I walk in. As a fat person, and I use that word because that is not a bad word, it is an adjective that describes the body that I live in. As a fat person coming into these games, I don't see a lot of representation of myself in LRGs or in actual games. And so one of the first things that I thought was, I want to be that representation. And it's one of the reasons I continue doing these games the way that I do them. However, I walk in there as a fat person and I can't hide that or disguise it or do anything to mitigate people's thoughts when they see that. And it's one of those things that it really hits you as like, people are going to either like think that you're really weak and they're like, what's the point of even carrying you around? Because like, you're going to drag us down in challenges. Or they're going to be like, ugh, yes, bring this person to the end because I can absolutely beat them in any final challenges, which I will say in later games that I played, I used that as a strategy. I was like, oh my gosh, wait, no, if I make it to like the final and it's running, you guys are clearly going to beat me. Meanwhile, knowing in my back pocket that I would do extremely well in puzzles, memory challenges, strength-based challenges, which is something that I have used to my advantage, specifically in Survivor games, where right out the gate, we had to do the tug of war, called something else here, Columbus Survivor. And you can only put up 2 people. And my immediate thought was, I have to be in this challenge because I need to show that I am useful. So strength is something that I have. There are not many people that can pull me across anything in tug of war. And I was able to prove that. Do I have endurance? No. Learned recently, I'm really good at balancing things. Who would have thought that? But people kind of like look at a fat person with the stigma of like, you can't do anything physical. You're going to be like sluggish and lazy. You're not going to help out at camp. You're not going to do any of these things. So I have to fight against that stigma coming in, and I can't hide that. Whereas with my autism, I can hide that if I choose. However, I do not hide that in any of the games I play. And I do that for the specific reason of being a late in life diagnosed autistic female. is already a challenge because we struggle to get our diagnoses. But it means that I've had to mask and create a persona for almost my entire life, that I've never actually gotten to truly be myself or truly showcase my personality. Coming into LRGs, that is the spotlight, the stage to do it, to quite literally let your mask drop and just be who you are authentically. So I come into games knowing that I could keep that part of myself hidden if I wanted to, and I elect not to because it allows me to truly be my authentic self. And in that way, I don't think that one ever hinders me. I don't think I mean, people do have, you know, when you say, oh, autism, a image does conjure in a lot of people's minds. And I also like that I can help break that mold as well, because I don't fit the like shape and like the cookie cutter of what people think when they think of an autistic person. And so it shows that, you know, I can do this game and I can do it authentically as me.
And so I guess these next two questions are kind of roll into one. I guess, how do we erase the stigma that you experience in the games versus, and along with, how can players therefore be better allies?
Ooh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're good questions. I think erasing the stigma is partly what we're doing now. We're playing the games, we're being who we are, which are people with disabilities, and we're talking about them. And we're going out there and we're doing it, and we're telling people how they can make their games more inclusive of other people with disabilities. We're hopefully showing other people with disabilities that they can also play these games, and so hopefully they can get into the games as well. And I think that our presence in these games can challenge what
I agree.
our fellow castmates and production members' ideas of disabled people is, right? And that helps break the stigma. I think just being there, the representation helps to break the stigma. And what do you think about breaking the stigma?
I can't agree more. One of my castmates from Surviving Bloomington season 7 was Mariah Sharon from
Yeah, she's wonderful.
42, I believe, is the season she was on.
Yeah.
40, 42, one in between those. And
early 40s
yeah,
for sure.
40s. She's actually writing an LRG book right now.
Yeah.
And if anyone has seen the LRG documentary that is currently trying to find Survivor games to film, she is the head producer of that as well. But I was interviewed for her book. And in the interview, one of the things we talked heavily about is she is an autism advocate, because her son has autism and ADHD, and Survivor is his favorite show. And she actually applied to go on Survivor because he wanted to know if he could do it someday, if she thought he'd be able to do it. And so she asked me in the book, do I think that having autism holds me back, or that can anyone do it? And I said, oh, absolutely. And so that's another piece of like the stigma breaking down, is we really are trying to show that representation. That's why I not only want to go out there as an autistic person, I go out there as a fat person, as a genderqueer person, as someone living with multiple chronic illnesses and chronic pain, because it shows that, oh, I don't have to be like a super athletic, love hiking in nature, and like, look at me running marathons every other weekend person to compete and do well in these games. And this podcast, I think, is going to serve really well for kind of helping producers and people who play games to kind of notice and help accommodate with things, or allow certain accommodations. I saw someone in the chat say that they had one of the things we're talking about, I think it was the mental health with compression, that they want to implement it for future seasons of their games, which I absolutely love. Someone else brought up colorblind accommodations of like adding the little R, that they would want to use that. And I think that is just like the first like step, and I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I think so too. In terms of other players being accommodating, I think that, the things are, that's just, one, it comes down to like be a decent human. Like easy peasy. At Survivor Weekender, I was on a tribe. Sorry, I realized I like can't spoil suddenly. I was gonna say stuff and I'm like, okay, I'll spoil things.
Walk the fine line of details, but no details.
I know. It's a fine line for sure. But I had one of my tribe mates, Carter, when we were all kind of, after we got to our camp and kind of sitting around and stuff, I now have a hot pink cane that has like bubbles and sparkles in it. So it not just my like cool little like foldable cane. And so it's like, I mean, no matter what cane I'm using, it's very visible, but the pink one is like extremely visible, right? But we were all sitting around after we had kind of gotten the lay of the land a little bit, and we were all in a circle, and Carter just asked when we were sitting in the circle and said, is there anything that we need to know that about you using a cane, what we can do to help, or, just anything that we need to know. And he just opened that and left it to me. And I think like that's the best thing that anybody can do in your life anywhere. But I think especially in this game is to ask the disabled person, how can I help you? Or is there anything I need to know? Or we need to know collectively. And that kind of ended up spurring a conversation with all of us about our like strengths and weaknesses and kind of what we feel like good about and maybe not so good about. But it was a really great way for me to just like, it wasn't like we were just ignoring the elephant in the room. It was there. The question was asked, and I was able to say, like, oh, I have chronic pain. I've had like multiple surgeries on this hip. I'm actually like not even a year out from this, like my pelvis being broken and learning to walk again. And I just need my cane to help keep my strength up. So hopefully I can stay out of pain, but I should be able to like drop it for the challenges. But I don't have any restrictions on anything. I can do everything. It's just to help keep me stronger through the length of the game. But if anything pops up or if I need help with anything, I will ask. And that was just kind of it.
Yeah, I will say my experience with passing out mid-game, that's a scary situation and people don't know what to do. And that's the thing is I, pretty vague. I'm just like, hey, if I pass out, don't call the ambulance because I'm not getting in it. And I, learned through the experience of passing out at a game that I should be a little more explanatory of like what to do. However, I will say I went down, production ran over, started throwing ice water, frozen vegetables, anything they could on me. They started getting, my best friend Trish started getting me water to drink. The men that were playing the game with me wanted to help. They wanted to be allies. They wanted to be able to assist, and they didn't know what to do. So they picked up a massive card table and carried it over and held it over me like an umbrella, with one of them each holding each one of the legs to try and help cool me down to see if that's what was wrong, because they didn't know how to help and I couldn't talk. I was being asked questions apparently, and I have no recollection of being asked questions. But they went out of their way to be like, oh my gosh, we need to help. We don't know how. We're not going to get all up in there and like try and like do anything. We're just going to stand here and do what we can to help without getting in the way, which I thought was so incredibly like kind of them, because they could have just stayed back and like let production handle it. But instead, everyone ran over to try and assist in any way they could. And I think that really shows not only just like how to be a decent human, but also how great the LRG community is, because the second I hit the ground, there were people, and they made sure like they shut down production until I could get up and go, because they were like, we're not touching that. This is more important. We want to make sure if you're okay, which was so amazing to see in a game. Like, you never think that's going to happen, because it doesn't always happen in real life.
Yeah. That's great. That's great to hear.
I guess so. I think we've hit all the major talking points I think we had set out. Is there anything else you want to mention that we haven't had a chance to get to, or do you have a succinct way you want to kind of wrap up and like succinct advice to give to the games out there?
The succinct advice, I would say like really take a step back and look at your games and look at the people that you've cast and see how diverse and inclusive it actually is. And work, really take a step back and really reflect on how inclusive is it of if somebody has a disability. Look at your challenges now in the off season and say, oh, if somebody's colorblind, can they do this challenge? Which is not a disability inclusion. Well, I guess it is. Colorblind's a disability. But it's not something that's seen as a disability. I think the way, somebody with hearing loss, right, is seen. But like, take a step back and go, how can I like look at every aspect of your game that you've had and say, how could I have made this more inclusive? How could I have made this safer? How can I look at my application and make it more inclusive, right? And that's, are you asking for food allergies or allergies overall? Are you asking for dietary restrictions? Are you asking about if a player needs accommodations for any reason, such as disability? And are you doing that? And then do the prep work for mental health, especially if you're in a vote out based game, because I saw that this summer with Survivor Weekender. It became really important. Somebody left early because they were voted out early and they were not prepared for everything that would come. And they didn't want to stay there. And, I get it. You don't know, like, you're voted out on the first day. You don't always want to sit around the rest of the weekend and watch everybody else playing. So make sure you're prepared for all those things and just really take a step back and then, or talk to people, reach out.
Yeah, I mean, Nina said almost every single thing perfectly.
Sorry.
No, the only thing that I think that I would just add in for both production and fellow players is don't count anyone out. Don't count anyone out. Production, I know that, sometimes we have certain demographics we're trying to fill and certain this and certain that. And, sometimes we look at a person and we're like, well, maybe these challenges will be too hard for them and they're not applying if they can't handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And players especially, if you see someone walk in that is different than you, if you see someone who is maybe a lot shorter than you are, if you see someone who is larger bodied, if you see someone who is walking with a cane, if you see someone who has cochlear implants, don't count them out. don't count them as an easy guaranteed victory if they make it to the end because they're disabled, but also don't count them as an easy win at the end if you have to bring them and go against them.
Yeah.
Because all that's going to do is make us fight 10 times harder to prove to not only you, but to everyone else that there's a reason they should have done that.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Don't count anybody out for any reason. And I think that's part of this conversation and part of the representation, like, is challenging your ideas of what a disabled body can do, what a larger body can or cannot do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think for me, my big takeaways from this conversation is just just a reiteration of the intentionality that should go into creating and running these games. I mean, to my knowledge, none of us are doing this for money. None of us are going to get rich going off these games. We should be aiming to make games that are open and as accessible to everyone as possible, because we all have this shared passion for this crazy thing of going. If it's Survivor, going to the wilderness and starving. If it's Big Brother, going in a house competing against total strangers. If it's the mall, it's lying your socks off for 3 to 5 days straight. Like, we have a passion for this together that it's hard to find other people in our lives that do that too.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Thank you, Stephen, for entertaining my idea to have this conversation. And thank you, Mira, so much for joining us in the conversation. When I was thinking of it, I was like, well, there's really only one other person I know who has been so open about being disabled, especially in a way that's a disability that I don't have. So I thought especially too that it was really great to have differing disabilities between the two of us to be able to talk about the inclusion.
I'm so glad that you asked me to do this. This is something that I talk about in almost every confessional and game I go on, is, fighting against the stigma, not only that others have put on me, that I put onto myself because of the society we live in and being a disabled person.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's so true. The internalized ableism I still have is real.
Yeah. So I was so excited when you reached out and I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm so ready. Let's go. I talk about this.
Yeah. You responded within 30 seconds. I was like, okay, we're in. We're good.
Nina, again, thank you so much for helping make this conversation happen. Thank you for bringing me in the help moderate, and I really appreciate both you and Mira just sharing everything you have. And I think hopefully this is hopefully LRGs continue to grow, and this is something that games continue to learn more and do better with.
Me too. I hope we see some great implementations on games next year.
Yeah, I'm excited.
People thinking about this conversation, so
I'm excited to see if there's any big trends in games after this, especially mental health aftercare. That'd be super cool to see.
Yeah, that would be really, really great. So love it. Awesome.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. This has been a special episode in the LRG podcast discussing disability inclusion, but hopefully we'll have more important conversations like this in the future as well. Nina, Mira, have a great evening, and everyone else have a great evening as well.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.